So I am excited. I met Erica 2 years ago at Shakuna conference that was happening in San Francisco, and I really love the concept of what her nonprofit does. And I'll be telling you a little bit more about that. And of course, she'll dive into it. But as founders of the Divine Assembly, we get emails on the regular, people asking about how to deal with certain things. And as post Mormons, recovering Mormons, we don't want to be we don't want to be anybody's bishop. We don't want to be anybody's Relief Society president. We don't want, that is not our role. We're not, we want people to really have autonomy in these spaces. So a big part of what we talk about is safety, so that each individual can keep themselves safe. And you can keep each other safe, right? If you have friends in the space, there are things you can do to do that. But when something happens, that where you don't feel safe, or something happens that is not good, I like that there are groups like Erica's, like Shine Collective, where we can go and get help. And so I'm as interested as most of you in what Erica is going to have to say here, because this is going to be a little bit of other than that conversation we had and the time I spent on her website, I want to know more. So I'm going to introduce Erica, and then I'm going to just turn it over to her and let her take over and we'll go for 40 minutes or so, and then there will be plenty of time for questions. If you want to ask a question to the group, like you missed something, just like Doula Steve did a minute ago, go ahead and put in the chat and somebody will answer that. If you have a question specifically for Erica, put it in the Q&A box there at the bottom, and we will get to those questions at the end. Okay, Erica Siegal is a psychedelic assisted psychotherapist. She's a community organizer and a harm reduction advocate. She has spent the past 20 years exploring diverse ways to create impactful, connective experiences while increasing community safety and wellness. Erica worked on MDMA-assisted psychotherapy clinical trials from 2014 to 2019, and has spent over a decade providing harm reduction and crisis response services at events and festivals worldwide. In 2019, she founded two organizations: Nest Harm Reduction and Consulting, a California-based mental health practice that provides psychotherapy, outreach, education, and integration services. And she recently founded Shine Collective, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting those who have experienced real harm from assault, abuse, neglect, coercion, and manipulation within psychedelic communities. Given her years of experience and unique lens on psychedelia, Erica provides commentary and insight into the risks and potential harms in the mainstreaming of psychedelics into society and culture. And because we have such an active psychedelic community here in Salt Lake and in TDA, I really, when we knew we were going to do these Zooms, I wanted her to be one of our guests, and I'm really glad she said yes and that she's jumped right in. So with that, Erica, I'm going to let you take over. Can you share your screen?
Oh, I'm going to send you a request right now.
There you go. Okay. So you're all set. I'm going to go ahead and close my video, but I'm here and I'll jump on if there are any questions or I feel like there's anything that needs to be clarified or anything at all. Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that lovely introduction. My name's Erica. I'm really excited to talk to your community, the TDA community, about how to be aware of some risks and harms and how to create safety in psychedelic spaces. I know we have a short period of time. Feel free to pop questions along the way in the Q&A, and hopefully I can answer them as I'm chatting. I'll keep the screen up, the Q&A screen up for myself. So feel free to interrupt me that way if you want to. Um, let's see. Well, we got a little bit of an intro. I just always like to give the people who want an outline of what we're going to talk about today. One of the things that we're gonna dive into is like basically how to make good psychedelic decisions, whether that's for you or your loved ones or your community members. But there's like a giant matrix factor that goes into optimal experience that I really want to dive into with everyone, just to bring people into awareness of all of the different ways people are interacting with psychedelic plants and different medicines. And then I really want to give, especially for people who, were raised in strict religious upbringing, there are some community and facilitator risks that should be brought into everybody's awareness as a way to help you protect yourself and a way to bring in community dialogue. I'll talk a little bit more about potential areas of abuse and harm and kind of what types of harm I'm seeing occur when people reach out to me about support. And then what you can do in your home communities to reduce risk for client or community safety. As Sarah said, my name's Erica. I'm LCSW, a psychedelic psychotherapist, and have spent the past 15 years professionally, 20 years, more than 20 years personally in the field of psychedelics. I founded two organizations. One's a psychotherapy practice, and the other one is a nonprofit that's specifically working with harm and abuse in the space. I also am on the board of Shefa, which is the Jewish Psychedelic Support Network. And so I do a lot of work from a spiritual religious lens as well when it comes to psychedelic practice, not just a medicinal clinical lens. And I also last year was on the board of Psychedelic Medicines and Therapies, where we looked at credentialing standards and ethical guidelines for potential facilitators. Um, Feel free to if you want any advice in the field, feel free to reach out to me afterwards, send me an email, set up a consultation in any of these areas. And so as we are learning today, I think it's really important to set some intention where we're not here to talk about how great psychedelics are. We're all probably here because psychedelics we already think or believe that there's, immense potential in psychedelic medicines. We're actually here to talk about the kind of nasty stuff. And I want to let you know that this is a very small pie slice of people who are having psychedelic experiences. My lens is skewed because I get more reports of harm and abuse than the average person out there. Feel free to ask any questions. We're here to not be judgmental and to get our questions answered. And if people have, questions around boundaries or dual relationships and, you're looking for guidance, feel free also to this is an environment in which we are here to learn, where we are looking at ways to improve, right? We are not perfect. The human experience is not perfect. Feel free to ask questions and respect each other. So, when talking about how do we actually make really good psychedelic decisions to create optimal outcomes, it's a combination of these five main factors: what the substance is, what the setting is. Setting probably goes into that, but what environment are you in? Where are you? Is it one-on-one? Is it group? Is it, ceremonial? Who's the facilitator? How well can they create a container that is held well for everyone participating? Is there some sort of support plan developed if something goes wrong, or if somebody in your community is having an adverse reaction, or if you need more integration? What does the individual support system look like? If you are going through a lot of life changes or going through grief, it might not be the right, or experiencing health issues, might not be the right time to engage. And so that's also right. Not only is it do I have enough support, but it's also, is this the right time for me? And so I encourage everyone who is in psychedelic practice to recognize that there is a flow of like healthy use, overuse, and periods, and I encourage periods of integration. Oftentimes, if you're working with medicine for, an extended period of time, to, take a solid 6 months off, every, as a period of integration. I also encourage facilitators to take sabbatical every 7 years because they also need to take a break. And so really looking at timing and support as a integral part of the model. And everybody's using psychedelics for all different reasons, right? We all come to the table with different trauma histories and different backgrounds. My friends at Altered States created this lovely Venn diagram that I like to use with their permission, which is like we're all kind of looking for transformation. We're all looking to move in some direction, whether that is resolving trauma or experiencing joy. We are all looking for kind of this like altered state, change state. And we can get that through wanting to heal illness from a medicinal lens, ceremonial lens to engage in a spiritual practice or connection with the divine. Um, Exploration. Humans are curious. Like we are very curious. We want to actually be curious with our own consciousness. Recreation and fun, which is actually the majority of psychedelic users out there. And then I like to throw in the biohacking people that are doing it for performance, whether that is microdosing or engaging in other sort of practices, but engaging in psychedelic use as a way to be performance enhancing, cognitive enhancing. When somebody is, I actually left out the slides of like all the different psychedelic substances because I feel like you as an audience already have kind of the medicines that you are working with. But if you want more information about which psychedelics people are taking for what, I can send you that information as well. And I highly encourage the resources on the psychedelic.support website when looking at discernment around substance. And so when people are like, all right, I'm going to take a psychedelic substance, right? You set the intention. You're in this contemplative stage. Where is this right? What's the right substance? Am I going to a place where it's legal, like Oregon or Colorado, or traveling internationally, or am I taking a risk by engaging in that practice in a state in which psychedelics are still criminalized? Also, like, is this the right community for me, right? There are some people that really only want to sit in single gendered groups, like a women's group or a men's group. We have some people that only want to do one-on-one work and not do any group work. And so really in this contemplation stage, it's like important for you to start thinking like, where am I at? What are the right decisions for me? And then you go into a period of preparation. And this is where you are building relationship, building trust, making sure that the facilitator, the people that are in positions of power, um, are giving you the right answers to your questions. They're giving you informed cost, estimated cost and informed consent. And ideally giving you some journal prompts, some work to do ahead of time, some intention setting activities, so you can actually also go through this, like, is this the right time, right place, right medicine for me? Um, and that period, that contemplation and preparation for a lot of people, takes years to like build up the desire or the fortitude or the curiosity to be able to actually engage in some sort of psychedelic treatment. And once you engage in that psychedelic that psychedelic service, especially if there's a facilitator or a leader or some sort of group structure, you become a more coercible, more manipulatable socially bonded individual within the community structure. And so making sure that once you've started the psychedelic engagement, that you are also evaluating whether or not you want to continue instead of feeling like you are being pulled into community. And oftentimes people are running and they want to run into a new community because they felt harmed or ostracized from either their family of origin or their religious upbringing or things like that. So it's really important to also be aware that a lot of people are like looking for a community that will give them answers, make them feel like they belong, things like that. And there are different risk factors that play when you are engaged in psychedelic community practice versus a medical treatment, right? Like you don't become friends with your podiatrist or your therapist. There are ethical boundaries around having dual relationships with mental health providers and people who work with vulnerable populations. And so it's really important to understand the group dynamics that come into play when you're part of a community and there are people in positions of power. But we'll get into that in a little bit. And then there's a period of aftercare and integration, and whether it's short term, long term, or of higher engagement in community activity and involvement. Some people want to get more involved in a church or a community, and in some communities that is appropriate and encouraged. And sometimes that is like not appropriate and not encouraged. Let me see. So, Steve, I'm gonna pause and ask this question. Um, can you explain more about what do you mean a psych membership card? I don't know what that means. Evaluate, like ask more, or like follow up in the chat.
Erica, I'm going to jump in. We have TDA offers a membership card, and like you're a card carrying member of this group. And I don't know, I'll be super curious to hear what Erica has to say, but yeah, we have seen that work for some people as a level of protection here in this country, or sorry, in this state. But we haven't heard from anybody outside of the state. So yeah, I'd love to hear your feedback on if you think that would be helpful for people.
Oh, around like law enforcement or around hospitalization? Like probable cause to get searched?
I think that's what uh Steve is trying to say. Law enforcement. If law enforcement sees it, can they use it as against people?
That is a question for an attorney. Which I am not. Thinking about that, and thinking about law enforcement, and the level of training that law enforcement has is they'll probably see the card and have no idea what it is. um, and so I don't think it would be probable cause. It's like a private club, unless, it says like printed psilocybin mushroom like membership club on it, which I don't think it probably does. And so if it just says, the Divine Assembly, like what, like I don't think law enforcement would kind of know what that was. And so I think it would be low risk. But great question, and we can get a little bit more into the legal stuff when we talk about community risk. And so to go back into like a psychedelic discernment, like here are some questions that you can ask yourself. Or if you have psychedelically curious friends or family members and they're like, hey, I'm thinking about trying this thing, giving them these types of questions might help them make better decisions. Because what I have found in working with this population is if somebody is like, I want to take mushrooms because I saw fantastic fungi on Netflix and I think this is the right thing for me, and they go to a place and they don't pass a mental health screening or they're on contraindicated medications, they will just continue to make higher risk decisions until they get what they want. Right. And so we're sending people who are in the most level of distress, who maybe don't qualify for a clinical trial or things like that. And they are, going to the most ethical person they can find and getting rejected, and then going to a higher risk, maybe higher risk, lower cost, or finding themselves in situations in which they are around ill-intentioned individuals. And so it is helpful to know, like, the questions to ask yourself and your friends in your community, right? Is this a one-on-one? Is this a group setting? Who's the facilitator? What kind of training do they have? Will they touch me? What interventions are used? Like, is this the right timing? And like, is this right for me right now? There are some high risk factors that come into play when you are working with medicine. Is the treatment appropriate for the age of the minor? There are communities, South American and Amazonian communities, that will give small amounts of ayahuasca to children in their community. There are children who are getting trained in indigenous lineage who are under the age of consent here, like in different countries and things like that. But it's a question of, if there are kids or children or teens involved, right? Like in this country, it's a no, because all of that is illegal and there's a lot of liability and things like that. But culturally, there are places where there are teenagers who are engaging in medicine work. Another high risk factor is people who have significant trauma history. They might need more support. They might need more resources. Is your community, your facilitator, do they have enough to support that person? Is there a mental health resource list? Is there a community fund to help people get care if they need care? And is this, the right match? I would never send a female sexual assault survivor to a circle that is male only facilitated. Like that might trigger them, right? And so really, that might like be inherently an unsafe decision. Same thing with people who have a lot of medical trauma, or harmed by the medical industry or therapeutic industry, would rather go into religious ceremony than they would go back into a doctor's office or identified community, like a African American only community that's dealing with those issues, or like a Jewish only community that's dealing with Jewish issues. And so making sure that there's a good match there. And then, any kind of contraindicated meds, any facilitators that might not have good, like well-established practices. All of these things are risk factors that go in. So when we talk about where people are doing psychedelics, right, we kind of talked about like, how do we prep ourselves? How do we make good decisions? What's the substance? Where are we engaging in practice? So there's the recreational space, which is the majority of people who are taking psychedelics, about 40% of people. Psychedelic assisted psychotherapy or clinical trials in a medical model, mostly dominated by ketamine right now, but very one-on-one work, also very expensive. The microdosing community, which is kind of a self-regulating or self-administered, because it's so low dose. And then there's, ceremony, whether that's religious or not. But like indigenous lineage or Christian or Judeo-Christian or Islamic, or like the overlay between religious use and indigenous ceremony use. Oftentimes that setting is done in a group setting. And so it is if you are somebody who is looking for more one-on-one personalized work, like that might not be the greatest place for you to start. Intentional use, which is where I kind of advocate for more psychedelic practice and more safety standards is small groups of friends or small community members self-regulating, getting together, maybe at somebody's house or at a ranch or on a retreat. And it's, a small group of intentional use, but not so much psychotherapy oriented and not so much ceremonial structure oriented, but a small group of friends, right? Like a home worship. It is really what I like to advocate for, because I find it has the least amount of power dynamics. And then there's problematic use where people are overusing and like psychedelic assisted or psychedelic use disorders do exist. People do have, if they're over consuming medicine, can have some psychological and medical risks associated with it. So it's also important to be like, hey, some people are not using psychedelics in a like healthy and generative way. How do we address that as a community? How do I tell somebody in my community who I care about that I think that they're overusing medicine? And like, how do we have a system set up where we can have that dialogue? Do I have a relationship with that person where I can go to them and they can receive, some sort of constructive feedback? And so these are kind of the like, there's like the home, medical, ceremony, recreational space, and kind of like international retreat model that we're seeing most of the use. There are also different types of people serving medicine, right? And there is types of facilitators, and then we'll go into kind of like how they overlay into community. And so there's therapists that are licensed, like can take insurance, can work in the medical model and hospital models, oftentimes has the least amount of dual relationship because they have the most amount of boundaries put on them, right? Like you're not friends, your therapist isn't your friend, your therapist is a therapist. When you start overlaying psychedelics into all of this, you like really want your therapist to be your friend. Sometimes your therapist wants to also be your friend, but like there are ethics and boundaries put into place here that are different when we look at more of a church community model. And so there are also guides might also lead communities, right? We don't really find the MDMA doctor kind of, hosting community events and sound baths, but oftentimes we have this overlap of guides and ceremonialists that are also leading and building community. And it creates a lot of confusion amongst community members when they begin to pedestalize or think that their facilitator has special powers or really like wants to get closer to them, because that is one of the things that's one of the side effects of psychedelics. Ceremonialists, right? Usually somebody who has some religious training, and they actually have, like most ministers and pastors and rabbis and imams, they also have ethical guidelines about, engaging in romantic relationships or dual relationships or business relationships with people in their community. And so when it comes to a relational boundaries thing, like therapists have the most, but I feel like religious leaders are kind of under that as well, is they have the most training and experience when it comes to holding ethical boundaries. Guides, peer support, or guides, coaches, friend groups have oftentimes muddy, blurred boundaries, because they're also hosting community events or taking people on retreats or going to music festivals together or going on camping trips together. And it turns into more of this community model. So when you're choosing a facilitator that you want to work with, all facilitators should be trained in some sort of facilitation and have awareness around all of these factors. They should screen everybody they're serving medicine with and establish clear boundaries. Once you start serving medicine for somebody, you also probably shouldn't start a romantic relationship with them. And that's the responsibility of the facilitator to say, if I'm serving medicine for you, you become manipulable and coercible. And so I'm going to let you know that, like, I don't want to, or like, I am not allowing myself to engage in any sort of sexual or intimate, like intimate relationship with you. This becomes different when friends and lovers start serving medicine to each other, because the boundary was established before the medicine power dynamic comes into play. But for facilitators, they should, they should follow the utmost care of making sure that they are not creating harm and confusion in the people that they are serving. Ideally doesn't work in a silo, works with other facilitators, has consultation groups, provides informed consent, that involves somebody like leaving and sleeping on it and making their own decision about whether they want to engage in it. Not just like, oh, you came to my house for dinner tonight and now do you want to take mushrooms with all of us, but I'm going to facilitate for you. Like, different dynamics around consent. Answer all the questions you might have. And provide some sort of feedback system. Like, hey, how did that go for you? Was that okay? And oftentimes that needs to be done with an outside party, because people don't want to give direct negative feedback to somebody they view in a position of power. It's like part of the human experience. So red flags for facilitators, right? This is the like, oh, if I see my facilitator doing this, like, run away, right? Doesn't provide any screening or substance or safety information, uses the phrase, don't you trust me, when they haven't established trust boundaries with you. Works completely alone, doesn't provide any integration or any support, kind of has that like traveling snake oil salesman like vibe. Doesn't provide financial transparency or significantly changes the price of services. If there's financial exchange that's happening. Brings up sexual subject matter irrelevant to your needs. Unless you're going in there to talk about your sexual trauma or sexual dysfunction, like, they shouldn't be bringing it up, right? If you bring it to the table, they can talk about it, they can work with it, but they shouldn't be suggesting anything sexual in nature without established, like, this is a thing that I want to work on with you. Anybody who claims to be enlightened or have special powers or misrepresents their credentials and training. So then this brings us into, like, not just facilitators, but communities. And so in the clinical medical community, right, there's a really high power differential, and there's usually a high cost and a high financial exchange, but really low community harm, because they're not really running ongoing community work. And you're not hopefully seeing them outside of the setting, the treatment setting. For retreats, the power differential is kind of like like moderate to high, because there is such a range, and the cost tends to be also like moderate to high. And the community dynamics are moderate. Depends on who the guide is and what the community is, because sometimes guides don't do community events and they come in and they serve, and or they work with individuals for a short period of time and then don't move on to ongoing community building. Ceremony, like in a ceremony setting, ceremony community, right? The power differential is still like moderate to high, because there's still a facilitator, oftentimes a hierarchical structure. The cost tends to be lower because there's a community that's supporting it. They can offer low income pricing. They can offer pricing for people who are economically challenged. But the community dynamic risk is really high, because, like, what happens when somebody either causes harm in the community or is not a good energetic match for the community or is unable to follow the boundaries and values and guidelines of the community? And how do you actually remove somebody from community or remove somebody from a position of power when they are causing harm. And it becomes really tangly in psychedelic religious communities. Recreationally, if you're doing psychedelics with friends, whether it's home worship or recreation, power differential is pretty low, right? It's a collective experience. It's collectively held. There's nobody holding the container for people who are in vulnerable spaces. Oftentimes the cost is low. Because you're not paying somebody to facilitate. And these substances on the underground market are not very expensive to obtain. But the community dynamics and like power differential can be really high in that too. And so it's kind of like a choose your own adventure, knowing that there are different pitfalls in like this in the risk and direction you go in. So how to choose the right community, right? There's like how to choose the right facilitator, but like if you're looking at it from a macro sense, right? We know psychedelics create social bonding, heightened emotional states, and connections that become confusing, blurred, and blurred easily during integration. That is oftentimes why we are taking psychedelics, is to experience non-dual oneness states. And so all the boundaries become blurry. Like the separation between yourself and the divine can sometimes become blurry. And so if you're in that and you have people who are in leadership positions, positions of power, facilitation, structures, they need to be extra vigilant in making sure that they are helping the whole community kind of reset the boundaries as a way to create sustainability. So psychedelic practices often that include religious or spiritual ritual or communal practice or shared belief systems, like that can become really harmful and chaotic. And we see this often in community dynamics where there's like what I refer to them as like chaos monsters, right? You like throw a chaos monster energy into the group. And like what ends up happening is the group just is trying to manage the chaos monster and the community can't actually do any community building. So psychedelic spiritual groups require established guidelines around shared values and agreements, right? Who we are, what we stand for, what are our values. One of the things that I like is like we are a non-violent community, right? So any sort of physical violence like is a violation of the community boundaries. Diverse leadership roles, right? There needs to be a separation of facilitators, administrators, maybe even committees that are working on different things like community guidelines or the community that I am a part of, is publishing a songbook and publishing a cookbook and really kind of how can we create a council of leadership instead of a singular point of leadership in our communities. That there is a system of feedback and accountability for ongoing supportive reflection, that there's financial disclosures around transparency, around what people are getting paid, and if we're fundraising for something where the money is going, and then some sort of support for long-term difficulties and integration. So community red flags would be that they engage in participant isolation from their support system, which is the like, don't tell anybody we're doing this vibe. That they idealize their facilitator or believe that they're special or infallible. The financial cost to be engaged continues to go up or goes beyond the client's ability to pay. Has inappropriate sexual or physical boundaries, engages in coercive manipulation, which is if that person's talking bad about me, and like the rumor mill runs in the background of most communities. When people who are raising concerns when their voices are getting silenced, big red flag. Engages gives you substances without your consent, engages in polysubstance dosing, or interjects their belief systems into participants' experiences and integration. I've seen that oftentimes with people who are in the LGBTQ community or they are confused around their sexuality or gender. and they go and they work with a therapist that is like, well, this is the path that you have to go on, instead of allowing them to like, right. It's like when the facilitator or leader's belief systems start to like control somebody else's path, big red flag around that community. So I know we're running out of time, and so I'm going to breeze through these last few slides. Some of the types of harm that we're seeing in individuals who have been harmed are fit into these, 4 categories, but there's some physical adverse reactions or injuries or accidents that occur. There's psychological, perception, emotional, cognitive, oftentimes having heightened anxiety, heightened sense of like disconnectedness or dysregulation. There's spiritual harm, derealization or having existential dread, delusions or magical thinking that like, yep, this is the thing. Like I connected with Jesus. Now Jesus speaks through me and I'm a prophet, can also cause some harm along this with the spiritual bypassing and ego inflation. And then there's interpersonal harms where it's like it's not a good facilitator match, or the community system can't hold the person. Then there's types of harm that occur from facilitators, including like just a poor match, poor setting, facilitator error, just like it's that like the person didn't choose the match wasn't made during the like rapport between the two facilitator and participant wasn't well established, and so it could just be like user error. Blurred boundaries, clients falling in love with facilitators, facilitators falling in love with clients, clients wanting to financially invest in facilitators' business plans. A lot of this like pedestalizing that we see that can occur. Some manipulation, coercion stuff, fraud, misrepresentation. And then the most egregious, which would be assault or abuse, in these spaces. And so, facilitators right now, there's like a lack of training. Some people are really well trained in the underground. Some people are medical doctors who have only been taking psychedelics for 2 years, and just because they have the right credentials can administer ketamine sessions without much training. And so we have a real wild, wild west happening in psychedelia right now. Fear of repercussions of either getting their licenses taken away, or arrested or harmed, and so facilitators aren't saying, hey, I want to learn more. Hey, I think, this was a wonky situation. I want to talk about it. And so everybody's kind of isolated and siloed. And it's really important for facilitators to be like, hey, I need a facilitator support group. I want to learn more. I want to work with somebody where I can safely say, hey, this thing went wrong in a session and I want to figure out a way to fix it for the future, and actually have some constructive feedback cycles. And so again, relational ethics, which is, making sure that we can hold the boundaries that need to hold with the clients that we're working with, or community members we're working with. And so for any sort of risk reduction that you can do in your home communities, right? If you are serving medicine, wanting to serve medicine, like form a consultation group with 3 other facilitators where you guys can talk about practices. There are organizations like the Sacred Plant Alliance that is a nonprofit organization that I do consulting for, where they are helping to provide RIFRA churches with more guidelines around this. Take more classes, give more feedback, engage in self-care, create more documentation around informed consent and limitations of care and transparency. And then like develop your own toolbox, like develop your own referral network. Grassroots community building really like starts with somebody making the decision to step up and say, our community needs this. I'm going to create it. How can we build this better? And start working on teams where you are values aligned, boundaries aligned, to start creating some more of this infrastructure. And if you want to work with me, where I can help create some of this infrastructure for you, I do offer consultation and coaching. And I'm going to stop screen sharing and open it up to any sort of questions from the webinar, or any follow-up questions you might have about community building. And I'm also going to put in the chat a donate link to Shine, which is my nonprofit where I do all of this work. I am definitely the type of person that's like, every dollar counts in nonprofit startup. And so if you feel inspired and want to give $10, $20, $100, whatever feels inspirational to you, we would always appreciate that. And I will always continue to provide this information to the community, like free of charge, in this way.
Erica, thank you. And yes, if anybody, I put it in again. I think you might have sent that that link just to me in the chat. Did you send it to everyone? Oh,
There's to everybody.
There it
That's
is.
the donate link.
It just was delayed. So I have a question. If people have questions, please put them in the Q&A. But if I have a question or two. So when you I have questions around sexual assault or sexual inappropriate sexual touching in the space, because we do get people contacting us about that.
Yes.
Tell me, from your group, how do you handle those things? What do you recommend people do? Because we have our policies, but I'd love to know if we're aligned.
Well, I really work from a survivor advocate standpoint. And if the survivor wants to move forward with legal, with assault charges or something like that, I am here to help them make the best self-directed decisions if they want to, report a therapist or something like that. But if it's a community member acting on another community member, often, and everything exists on a spectrum.
Sure.
Right? There is, sexual assault up until non-consensual intercourse, to, somebody getting kissed on the lips instead of kissed on the forehead, right? There's like a criminality line of like what, right? It was like, oh, this person like inappropriately touched my butt while we were like lying in a circle or something like that, right? That is non-criminal assault, which is something that could be mediated, re-educated into the community. Then there are things where there are people who are getting drugged and assaulted that is a criminal act. And usually, if that is a credible report and they don't want to file charges, this is oftentimes what happens, is a, decision of whether or not the perpetrator of harm is allowed to continue to be a member of your community. And I would say no, if it's an assault, right? Like right? If it was like everybody took MDMA and there was a cuddle puddle situation and somebody misread the signs and kissed somebody and it's
Sure.
like they're right, but it all kind of falls under, it doesn't exclude the fact that the person who was assaulted has the experience of feeling violated while they're in a vulnerable state.
Okay.
And it might be that person who is experiencing that violation might need the community to believe them, support them, and say, we want to make sure that you feel still welcome back in this community. Therefore, like maybe then you go to only single gender events or smaller events, or how do we make sure that this person, is there a repair process or a forgiveness process or a reparative justice process where the person who crossed the boundary says, I am really sorry. I did not recognize the gravity of what happened. I will never repeat that behavior again. What can I do to rebuild trust? And oftentimes people's egos are too proud to actually do that process.
Yeah.
We can offer them that process, but the point of the process is I will not repeat that behavior. I recognize that that behavior is wrong. I will not repeat that behavior in the future. I will do the steps that needs, and maybe that's volunteering at a women's shelter, or maybe that's, doing some other sort of service work. Um, and so it's on a spectrum of how much the people want to engage, how egregious was the harm,
Yeah.
how much the people are willing to engage in a reparative process.
There. Yeah.
And is that possible? And sometimes that is asking somebody to take maybe take a year of integration. And after the year, we can evaluate to see if it's appropriate to bring you back. But this person whose space was whose being was violated
Yeah.
needs a little bit of time, and we want to create a community, like we'll create a smaller circle for this person to do their community healing before they come back in. We can do that for both sides. But if somebody sexually assaults somebody, kind of, I don't get to play in my community anymore.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
There's one question in the, how do you feel about a facilitator not using psychedelics on the regular? Well, it depends what the position of power is and the spiritual practice is. Because I don't think there's very many people who are serving ayahuasca and not drinking low doses of ayahuasca when they're serving it. And there are hopefully 100% of the ketamine doctors out there that are not taking ketamine with their clients. Like, right? But do I think that somebody who is serving ketamine on a regular basis and doesn't have a personal lived experience or relationship with that medicine should be serving it? My answer is no. Um, it's very hard to help people navigate states if you've never experienced those states. And so, and you also kind of, like, from the indigenous animism perspective, probably don't have permission to continue to serve that medicine if you don't have relationship with it. And so, I mean, there are people out there that are like great mushroom facilitators and they are pregnant and they're like, I'm going to be pregnant and breastfeeding, so I'm not going to partake in medicine for the next 2 or 3 years. Does that mean they have to give up their careers for that? No. But I don't think you should be serving a medicine that you don't have a personal relationship with, but you don't have to be partaking of the medicine when you are facilitating.
Great answer. Thank you for that. I think it's a great answer because I completely agree with you. So
Right. And if somebody doesn't apply, yeah, like I want to hear, I also want to hear. I love the liveliness of the debate.
yeah, now I think that's exactly right. It's when I guide, I don't consume. I'm one of the sober parties. It's a harm reduction element for me, but it doesn't mean I don't consume other times, other.
Right.
So that's interesting. I don't know the backstory on that question. So I wonder what wonder what else they're asking there.
And because I come from, like years, decades of working at music festivals, people are like, well, you go to all these parties. Aren't you sad? Like, aren't you like sad that you don't get to like get high at the parties? And I was like, oh no, I do my work at home with my home circle and then I can go to the party and my job is to be sober at the party.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't sign up for that if I didn't want to be sober at the party. Like,
Yeah. I feel the same. I feel exactly the same. So, other questions? Any final questions? We have just a couple of minutes left. This has been really insightful. Um, I will say it was validating on a slide or two, thinking, okay, TDA meets this criteria. We're not a cult. See, we're not a cult.
I mean, everything's a cult.
We tease each other about that, of course. So
we do too. A whole like I feel like I've spent 20 years how to be like, how do I not start a cult? Like that's basically like oftentimes the question.
But no, it's good, and it's always good for us to check ourselves, as people in, some of these organizing positions. It's good for us to check ourselves and from outside sources. What are outside people saying? Because I don't want to think we're getting caught up in our own echo chamber and we're validating ourselves, but into some negative trends. So that feels really good. So thank you, everybody. And Erica, especially, thank you for being here. I hope this is the first of engagements. Let's figure out other ways that TA can support what you're doing, and that maybe you can support us in some of our projects. Because I think we're aligned on a lot of this, and we're TDA is stronger when we have outside influences like you.
Right. Yeah. I really think that that's also the thing. It's like we also have to start like, mycelium network reaching out to each other and be like, what are you guys working on? Like, what are you on? And so we can hold ourselves accountable. And so thank you all for taking the time to listen. Stay cool out there. And I will hopefully hear from all of you soon.